You guys heard a lot of things today around digitization, around where banks will be going or where banks are going. When you look at the landscape today, the biggest challenges across the entire framework, whether you're in asset and wealth management, whether you're looking at it from a banking and capital markets, whether insurance or whatnot, what you find is the recurring theme is consumers as well as businesses want customization. They want a personalized experience. And that personalized experience is the recurring theme. How do you get that personalized experience? It's the data. So the underlying theme across all of these things, and you're going to see more and more evolution from a regulatory standpoint that becomes ease of use of access to that data. You're also going to see more and more from an insurance and that industry standpoint, if you think about health and how you can monitor that in real time and actually base your insurance based on that. Things like driving a car and being able to gauge how your driving skills are and tie it directly to real-time insurance costs on a daily basis. And when you think about that with one key aspect to keep in mind, people are shifting in terms of demographics. If you think about a country like India, we have 50% of the population under 25. That's over 750 million people that become consumers who were born into the internet, who were not used to anything traditional, who don't carry a piece of paper. Most of my nieces, nephews, my friends' kids, they're all sitting there with a tablet at 1.5 and 2 years old. And that's reality. That's the experience they're used to. And they're expecting, I was just talking to a friend of mine, and he says, you know what? When he goes to his mom's place, his kids are expecting that they're going to be able to pause that show, go run to the loo, come back. That experience is an expected experience. They're not expecting the ad to be a generic ad. That is what's going to change in terms of what your audience is. And that's where each of you as technologists come in, because without you, that experience can't happen. What's interesting is the statistic when you read it. 76% of the firms aim to extract value from their data. 15% say they currently have the right data to extract value from. That's a massive gap in the marketplace. You store a lot of data. You store it for your customers. You store it for lines of businesses across the board. The question is, are you accessing that data for the asset value it really has? I'll give you another statistic that I found amazing. Boston Consulting Group did a study, and they found that 86% of the respondents from line of business said it's the infrastructure teams and IT departments that's causing them the lack of innovation that they want to do. That's a scary statistic, because technically you are the underlying plumbing and the underlying resource through which they can achieve their success. How do you change that mindset, and how do you empower them to be better at it? I think the whole concept of whether it's on-prem, off-prem, how you scale, all of those things are doable, but it's changing the mentality of your audience and getting them to understand and be an asset provider and a revenue generator. Because at the end of the day, technology has become the key differentiator and the key asset for anybody. When you look at this, how do we help? So we as Data Dynamics actually help you understand that data. What we find amazing is we started our journey spending the first 5 years helping customers get to clustered ONTAP from a variety of platforms. And the one recurring theme we found across all our customers, and we've moved over 200 petabytes of data using our StorageX platform, is nobody knew the data. They just moved, lift and shift, lift and shift. You know what? I got a consolidation, I got a refresh. I'm going to move the data. Understanding who owns it, when was it accessed, how old is it? Things that I thought were fundamental were not knowledgeable. And then when you think about the sheer data growth in most of these companies, 30, 40, 50%, it becomes an impossible thing to manage. Without that knowledge, how do you manage the infrastructure that's growing? Once you know what you have, it's driving data mobility. How do you then take that information, turn it into an asset, leverage it when and where you want it? And when and where you want it, whether you call it a hybrid cloud, and which I believe is the future reality. I don't believe it's a public versus private. In most enterprises, you will have certain workloads that you'll end up deploying into the public cloud. Or you keep it locally. And then from a managed standpoint, at least most of our customers today end up storing data, but they never really access that data once they store it after a certain period of time. So data gets created. Most customers, we're finding on average, 70% of the data is not touched in over 3 years. Think about that statistic and think about environments, 10, 20, 50, 100 petabyte plus environments. How do you now go in and help them understand leveraging that data as an asset? And as you think about more and more use of that data and being able to leverage it, can you go into a bank and say, you know what, I'm going into a bank and somebody already knows that you're going to be looking for a particular experience. And when I say going into a bank, physical, virtual, doesn't matter. Knowing that, hey, based on his cash position, he's going to need a loan, and that's what he's coming in for. And based on certain profiles, this is what I'm going to be able to provide him or her. These are the type of experiences that you're going to want to leverage all these containers of data that you've already generated. And then modernization. I think there was a lot of conversation, which was really good, around the API economy. And I think somebody mentioned 1,000 APIs per day or something that gets generated, right? That is the future. It's all interconnectivity. How do I make myself nimble enough to tie into an ecosystem rather than be standalone? And that's going to be and allow you to really drive the value from what you have. So from an analyze standpoint, it's amazing. I actually sit there and I wonder, people spend tens and tens of millions of dollars trying to store data, never really extracting value from it. So think about it this way. If you don't understand your data, you're purely storing it in a container. So understanding who owns it, understanding how exposed you are in terms of who has access to it, understanding what type it is. I met a company, their challenge was 80% of their data, according to the extension, was Excel files. Each of those files was over a gig. And they're wondering, how could that be? Users were downloading videos that they shouldn't be, saving it as a different extension, and now that data gets stored, gets replicated, and there's nowhere to manage it. These are the type of things that you can solve by knowing the data better. And if you know your data, you can then make more informed decisions. And unfortunately, in every institution, the big challenge starts with this knowledge base. Exposure from a compliance standpoint, exposure from a risk standpoint. And when I say data, I mean at a physical file or content level, beyond the storage layer. From a movement standpoint, I think you're going to see more and more data mobility. And when I say data mobility, I don't mean a data migration. I mean access to the data when and where you want it. Whether it's an application that wants that data because they want to run something at real time to figure something out, whether it's autonomous driving. And yesterday we talked about it, Rob, about how soon can you have access? What is core and edge? And that core and edge concept is going to change when you look at new things coming out with IoT. And it's going to be accessing that data, using it, sending it back, but then having real-time access. And when I say real-time, with a certain amount of latency depending on what you're doing, but being able to leverage and be able to be nimble with that. That's going to be an interesting play, especially when you consider the amount of data and how do you get there. And one of the things that we do with NetApp really well is this whole concept of storage grid. And how do you leverage object data to scale, to be able to store the sheer amounts of data, but rather than putting it on tape, I think you mentioned Iron Mountain, keeping it in something that can be queryable. Mitigate risk. This is something that I think as you have more and more data, the challenge becomes what do you keep, what do you not keep, who has access? It becomes a bigger and bigger challenge because this data is not just stored in a structured manner. It's stored across disparate locations. It's stored across multiple countries. And that becomes a huge challenge for you to manage as an infrastructure provider. And knowing and having a better understanding and guiding that compliance is an important aspect. Because you're not going to have, you can have multiple vendors. You can have multiple different types of storage. You're going to have it across multiple geographies. And mitigating any risk associated with accessing that data is probably the number one thing that any CIO thinks about. The worst thing that can happen is something that causes your data either to get corrupt and somebody doesn't have access. I think you mentioned, Thomas, right? Big bank in Paris a few weeks ago, not having access to data. And by not having access to data, I mean not having access to something that'll validate the use of their credit cards or their debit cards. And things like this can cause serious inconvenience to people that in today's world rely on it heavily. I give you a simple example. I'll ask you a quick question. How many of you have used cash in the last 24 hours? Show of hands. Wrong one to ask. Okay. How many of you have used cash in the last 5 days? It's still the same people. Okay. You will not believe, I keep, and the guys that know me know that I travel a lot, I keep six currencies in my pocket, and each one has been in my pocket for the last year and a half. Because I was going to actually ask you for your cash at the end of this. and the reason for that is use your credit cards, and it works everywhere. I use Uber. I don't pay for a taxi anymore. So when it comes to everyday life, I use Uber Eats, and they come and deliver at home. We order grocery online. Digitalization is changing the way we access and use the new financial world. So this, from a monetary standpoint, what we see as cash today, 10 years, 20 years, does cash even exist as a currency? I'm not saying currency goes away, but what is a digital currency? And that's an interesting concept that obviously blockchain and other things are trying to address. And then a competitive advantage. Each of you are here today trying to figure out, okay, how do you give that competitive advantages to your lines of business that can help drive greater revenue streams and better outcomes for your business? Digitalization, and again, the same Boston consultancy service says, you will reduce your costs by 20% if you can automate and digitalize. You will also increase revenue by 25%. So if you have a 20% cost reduction and a 25% revenue increase, you have a 45% delta swing. That's huge. Getting there is a journey, and I think that's an important aspect to also keep in mind as you're doing this, because I think there is a false notion in the market that you can get there easily. When you're a bank that's been around for 100 years, 50 years, 200 years, trying to change things is not easy. Trying to change process is not easy. It takes time, it does happen, but having partners like what NetApp is doing to take you into that journey from the data fabric standpoint is an important aspect to getting there. So, quick commercial on us. It's important. Data Dynamics, we're a strong partner with NetApp. We've been around for 7+ years. We understand enterprise data. And when I say enterprise data, 26 of the Fortune 100, 6 of the top 12 banks, just having New York as our backyard, allows us to deal with a lot of the financials. So we understand the complexities. We understand the geographic reach against which you're trying to deliver. We understand the breadth of data that you're trying to manage. It is staggering at how much data you have and how much data, more importantly, you're generating on a daily basis. And the sheer amount of data that we've touched or moved, and it continues to grow on an annualized basis. So it's unbelievable how much challenge exists, but there is a solution. And I think as you start looking at driving value into how do you extract asset value from that data rather than a cost center as storage, you will be able to provide a far better outcome for your business.